window and listen to the crowds, Mr. Adams. The streets are full of people cheering the war's end. Oh, isn't it glorious?
Oh, don't you think they're being a bit premature, Mr. Hancock?
What?
The British still hold New York and Charleston.
Yes, but we've got the French with us now. Washington and Rochambeau should be able to sweep the English into the sea.
Don't be too sure about the French, my friend.
Why?
They have other commitments that they may feel are more important than 13 impoverished colonies.
Well,
Washington will have his hands full.
Hello, and welcome once more to Your Story Hour.
We're so glad you joined us today. We have a very special program for your listening pleasure. Right, Aunt Carol?
Yes, indeed, because today I'm going to tell the fourth of our stories on the life of George Washington. All of his life, he worked and fought for the freedoms we enjoy today.
Well, Aunt Carol, if I remember correctly, at the end of the last episode, the British had surrendered at Yorktown after a long, hard series of battles.
You have a very good memory, Uncle Dan. So let's get started right away and learn what happened next as the United States became its own nation. I call this story George Washington, the Uncommon Warrior. In October 1781, the colonial armies under General George Washington and the British under General Cornwallis stopped fighting. Cornwallis had surrendered. But the British troops had not yet left American shores. George Washington appealed to the French allies for help.
Welcome aboard my flagship, Monsieur le General Washington.
Thank you, Admiral de Grasse. I'll get right to the point, sir. Will you continue to help us by blockading and bombarding New York and Charleston? These are the last two strongholds left to the British. We must drive them out before we can say the war is really over.
But I am sorry, mon ami. That will be impossible. France has an agreement with Spain to drive the English out of the West Indies. I am already late for my rendezvous with the Spanish fleet.
But, Admiral, if we don't strike now, this war could drag on for years.
I am truly sorry, Jean-Louis, but there is nothing I can do.
General Washington, a message from Yorktown. The courier said it was urgent.
Thank you, Sergeant. Oh, no. Not Jackie.
What's the matter, General? You're as white as a ghost.
It's my stepson, Sergeant. I knew he was ill at Yorktown, but not this. They say he's dying.
Young Jackie Custis, serving as a temporary civilian aide on Washington's staff at Yorktown, had barely been able to stand when Cornwallis surrendered. Now he was deathly sick. Washington arrived at Eltham, the home of Jackie's aunt, just as the young man breathed his last.
Martha, my dear, I came as soon as I heard.
Oh, George, our beautiful Jackie, our lovely boy dead.
We must be strong for the sake of Jackie's wife and our grandchildren. Jackie is beyond earthly harm, but the little ones need us.
George, can you stay with us for a while? I know the worries that you have for the Army and the frustrations with Congress, but if you would stay for just a little while.
You are the most important one right now. You, Jackie's young wife, and the babies.
The general stayed with his sorrowing family for several weeks. Jackie's widow was left with 4 small children, the baby named George Washington Parke Custis, and Nellie with the bright curls and happy smile were adopted by the Washingtons. The 2 older girls went with their mother to her family home. Then, having done everything he could, George left Mount Vernon and traveled to Philadelphia.
Mr. Hancock, your President of Congress, I appeal to you for money to pay my army. These men have given the best years of their lives for the country. Now they want to go home.
Go home? Why, they can't do that. The enemy's still on our shores.
My men are deserting by the hundreds. Who wants to be in an army where payday never comes?
But, General...
No one. Don't you see we must keep our army intact and active until England signs a peace treaty?
Well, General, we can give you money. All the money you need.
If you mean the worthless script Congress has been printing by the bale, no thank you. My men need something more substantial than that, sir.
The people of Britain were getting sick of the war too, and they petitioned the king to sign a treaty. England had won most of the battles, but the victories by the rebel army had been decisive. Trenton, Princeton, Saratoga, Yorktown. In April, Washington was ordered to cease hostilities while the diplomats negotiated. In September 1783, the treaty was ratified. The war was really over, and in October, Congress dissolved the army. As the last of the British forces sailed away from New York City at the end of November, Washington and a small contingent of troops occupied the city. And then it was time to bid adieu to his companions in arms. At noon on December 4th, 1783, he and the principal officers of the army met at Francis Tavern. It was a sad parting. Tearfully he embraced each one, and then in silence raised his arm in farewell, turned, and left the room. He began the long journey home. There were stops along the way for official business and celebrations, and in Annapolis he presented before a grateful Congress the resignation of his commission as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. And then it was on to Mount Vernon.
All right, Pompey, let's go home.
Yes, sir. Yeah, get along there, horse. Yeah.
It was Christmas Eve and twilight when he entered the familiar grounds of Mount Vernon and rode up to his door. The many windows glowed with light, welcoming him home. The children and Martha ran from the house, shouting joyous greetings. Inside, the rooms were bright with Christmas greens and reds, and fragrant candles burned in the wall sconces. An apple log crackled in the fireplace. Home, at last. One day soon after, George and his friend William Fairfax were seated in front of the fire, enjoying the comforts of home.
You must practice more often, Nellie, if you want to become a good musician.
But, Grandma, I don't want to be a musician.
You're smiling, George.
I was smiling at that exchange between Nellie and her grandmother. It is one of the homey things I missed during the war. But still, the old army habits stay with me. I miss Fat Henry Knox and Green and even Dewar Putnam. I'd like to talk with Colonel Collins and Light Horse Harry Lee again.
How often, George Washington, have I heard you say that you are well out of it, that the farmer's life is for you? Old war horses do not take to pasture easily, I see.
I know. But old habits break slowly, sometimes sadly.
George became a busy farmer again. There were fences to repair and an ice house to build. The new strain of wheat was turning out well, but where to sell it? He took a trip to check on his Western holdings, and soon he was talking to other influential men about the feasibility of extending the inland navigation of eastern rivers such as the Potomac and connecting them by excellent roads or channels to western rivers such as the Ohio. He saw that this would bind together the young nation. Slowly, so slowly that even he didn't realize it, Washington was getting back into public life. In May 1787, he set out for Philadelphia, this time as a Virginia delegate to the Constitutional Convention.
Mr. Morris has the floor. Gentlemen, please, if we plan to accomplish anything at this convention, we must stop fighting like cats and dogs. Let Mr. Morris say his thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I was saying, we desperately need waterways connecting our states. That's right. Many of the farmers who live on the frontier have no way to get their produce to market.
Why should the states, with easy access to other states, pay for some farmer in Weston, Pennsylvania.
Because free interstate commerce would be good for our nation as a whole. Even in your state, Mr. J. The farmers must often pay tariffs to move their goods across a state line.
I cannot accept
I agree with Mr. Morris that we need a strong federal government. But I am afraid the people won't stand for it. And after all, we are here to represent and please the people of our states. What say you, Mr. Washington? You are chairman of this convention, yet you say little.
I say little, Mr. Hamilton, because I don't want it said that George Washington jammed his ideas down the throats of the delegates. To answer your question, if to please the people we offer what we ourselves disapprove, how can we defend our work afterwards? Let us not compromise, gentlemen, with the future of our nation.
All through the summer, they argued, these men who would one day be called our founding fathers. Finally, in September, they had a constitution hammered out. Benjamin Franklin, now over 80 years old, had been looking at the half-sun carved on the back of Washington's chair. Now he rose to speak.
As I have been sitting here all these weeks, I've often wondered whether yonder sun is rising or setting. Now I know it is a rising sun.
But the sun had a long way to go before it could clear the horizon. The states had to ratify the Constitution before it could become the law of the land. At Mount Vernon, George wrote dozens of letters asking friends and old Army comrades to support the new Constitution.
I sincerely believe it is the best that can be obtained at this time. The door is open for amendment later.
George, it's late. Come to bed before you make yourself ill.
All right. I'll be right along, my dear. What do you think of this Constitution we've concocted, Martha? I have always valued your opinion. Speak your mind.
I think it will be uphill work to pass it, George. Many people fear a strong central government.
Why do you think so?
A hand reaching out for taxes, whether it be from London or Philadelphia, will not be welcome.
Yes, I realize that. What would you do to win them over?
I would convince them that the Constitution is for their good, as well as for the good of the country.
Thomas Jefferson demanded a Bill of Rights be added so that Americans will always have freedom of speech, religious liberty, and trial by jury. I like that, don't you?
Yes, I do, George. I like that best of all.
Each state was to call a special convention to vote for the Constitution. As Martha Washington had predicted, it was uphill work to pass it. But by late spring of 1788, 8 of the 13 states had agreed to the Constitution. 9 votes were needed to make it legal.
I could not believe that Virginia would be a holdout, William. Patrick Henry is against the Constitution, and he has a loud and strident voice in Virginia politics. But our state has always been a leader for the national good. I feel shame that we are among the last to ratify.
Don't fret yourself, George. You have worked hard for its passage, and it will be ratified.
Finally, on June 21st, New Hampshire became the 9th state to approve the Constitution, followed by Virginia on the 25th. The states didn't wait for the final 3. An electoral college was designed to choose a president. In due time, the electors met in Philadelphia.
I see but one man to head our country, George Washington. What is your opinion, Mr. Morris?
I agree, Mr. Hamilton. He is honest to a fault, careful and judicious. James Madison and John Jay feel just as we do. Yes, Washington is our man.
George Washington had been elected the first president of the United States. In April, he set out for New York, where he would take the oath of office. People came from miles around to line his route and cheer. Huge celebrations greeted him at each of his stopping points. But the biggest jubilee was in New York. The Hudson was filled with boats of all kinds, packed with cheering people. Cannons boomed a salute, while a white barge, rowed by 13 sea captains dressed in white, carried Washington to the foot of Wall Street. There he mounted 13 elegant steps to where Governor Clinton and an honor guard waited for him. The oath of office was administered 1 week later, on April 30th, 1789, at Federal Hall by Chancellor Livingston. A crowd of about 50,000 jammed the square to watch the proceedings.
George Washington, do you solemnly swear that you will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of your ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States? So help you God?
I do.
The celebration lasted throughout the night with elaborate fireworks and an inaugural ball. Washington left early. The next morning, he began the business of the new government.
Mr. Adams, or should I say Mr. Vice President, it is good to see you.
Just call me John like you always did, George. What is the order of business?
I wanted to go over my choices for the cabinet with you.
Fine. Who will they be?
Henry Knox will be Secretary of War. Thomas Jefferson is Secretary of State. Edmund Randolph, Attorney General, and Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury. I have chosen John Jay to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, pending confirmation by the Senate.
I can see no trouble with Jay. I only hope that Jefferson and Hamilton can work together. They don't like each other.
They must work together. The country is too new and vulnerable to have conflict among its leaders. Gentlemen, this cabinet meeting will come to order. At the suggestion of Secretary Knox, I am going to ask Congress to increase our military budget. Our standing army now numbers only 2,400 officers and men.
Now, surely, Mr. President, that's large enough force in peacetime.
The Honorable Secretary of State has his head in the sand, as usual. The great new plantations on our borders with Florida need protection.
There goes Hamilton again, thinking only of the rich planters.
Gentlemen, please, we will never get any work done with this perpetual arguing. Now, if we may proceed. Mr. Hamilton is right in saying that our borders need to be protected. Spain is securely entrenched in Florida and controls thousands of Indians in the Mississippi Valley. England is strengthening her hold in Canada.
What of the coastline? Certainly we are vulnerable there.
Mr. Randolph, if Congress will allow us sufficient funds, we shall start construction of a fleet of warships to patrol our coast.
As Henry Knox has said, a strong navy is in our plans. To be prepared for war, gentlemen, is the most effective way of preserving peace.
In 1790, Congress decided to move the seat of government to Philadelphia until a new capital city could be built. Maryland and Virginia had donated 10 square miles on the bank of the Potomac for the new federal city. Washington knew the location well, across the river from Alexandria and just a few miles from Mount Vernon. After a careful study, he appointed Pierre-Charles L'Enfant to lay out the new city.
Mr. President, I really must protest Mr. Hamilton's financial program. The federal bank is clearly designed to benefit large landowners and the business and merchant classes. Small farmers are becoming resentful because the burden of taxation has fallen on them.
The country needs a strong financial structure, Mr. Jefferson. The federal bank is important to our growth and prosperity.
Mark my words, sir. Hamilton's policies will cause trouble.
4 years passed. Unanimously re-elected to the presidency, George Washington took the oath of office for the second time on March 4th, 1793. It was an ominous time in the history of the world. France was ablaze with revolution. King Louis XIV had been beheaded in January, and now France seemed ready to declare war on England. Remembering how France had helped the colonies in their war for independence, many Americans favored coming to the aid of France now. Washington was forced to make a decision.
My feeling is this. The very little we can do is surely not worth the risk to the future of our country. We will be neutral.
But no sooner was one dilemma out of the way than another arose.
Mr. President, we've got a big problem in Western Pennsylvania. The whole countryside is up in arms against Hamilton's tax on whiskey. They have sent a representative to ask you to drop the tax. Will you see him? He's an old friend of ours.
Of course, General Knox. Have him come in.
Hello, General.
Colonel Collins, it is wonderful to see you. Sit down, man. It always surprises me when I see old comrades after a long time. I remember them as young men, and I'm always a bit startled by gray hair and wrinkles.
We all get older, sir. I've come on a grave mission, I fear. We farmers in western Pennsylvania are being discriminated against by this new tax on whiskey.
General Knox here has told me about the contention. What is your side of the story?
Many of us on the western frontier grow corn, which is difficult to ship. So we turn it into whiskey, which is easy to move to market. What we don't understand is, if there is no tax on corn, why should there be a tax on a product made out of it?
Other things besides corn liquor have been taxed, Colonel. The government must have money to pay its way.
Sir, many of us farmers were former soldiers of yours. We feel we are being wrongly used. We don't have any money to pay taxes. All we have is whiskey. If the federal government pushes us, I'm afraid there will be a fight.
But there was no fight. An army of 12,000 was assembled and marched out to contain the insurgents. Some 150 insurgents were arrested, and the Whiskey Rebellion, as it was called, came to a bloodless end. Crisis followed crisis. There was trouble with England again. British warships were seizing American vessels bound for France, taking their cargoes and pressing the crews into the British Navy. The American people were in an uproar. Finally, John Jay negotiated a treaty that put a stop to the practice. But signing the treaty with England gave deep offense to France. So many problems, so many vexations. Washington was thankful that his second term was almost over. On March 14, 1797, he watched as John Adams was sworn in as the second President of the United States.
We're almost home again. Will you miss the challenge and excitement of government, George?
Not a bit of it, Martha. I'm going back to being the only thing I ever really wanted to be, a simple farmer.
Mount Vernon again became the center of merry social life in Northern Neck society. Perhaps the most happy occasion was the marriage of Nellie to her distant cousin, Lawrence Lewis. But George also had a large plantation to run.
Master George, the wind come up something fierce and it's starting to sleet and snow. Maybe we ought to go back to the house.
Don't be an old lady, Pompey. I want to ride out to the high pasture to check the fence before we go back.
You might at least put on your hat. Going to come down with a cold for sure, if and you don't.
We've been out in worse weather than this, old man. Come on, let's ride.
You look flushed, George. Perhaps you should change those damp clothes before you sit down to dinner.
You're as bad as old Pompey. I have a little bit of sore throat, but I'll be fine in the morning.
You're burning with fever, husband. You stay in bed this morning. I'm going to send for Dr. Craig.
All right. Maybe all I need is a good bleeding.
How is he, Doctor?
I've done everything I can, Mrs. Washington. The bloodletting should have purged him of all noxious matter. I can't understand why he should be so weak.
Martha.
Yes, I'm here. I'm holding your hand, my darling.
I die hard, but I'm not afraid to go. I want to lie in the family vault overlooking the Potomac. Do you understand?
Yes.
'Tis well.
Doctor, is he gone? Yes, I can see that he is. It's all over now. I shall follow him soon.
George Washington closed his eyes for the last time on December 14th, 1799. At a memorial meeting, Light Horse Harry Lee said of him, "He was the father of his country, first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. In the endearing scenes of his life, he was second to none."